Give me Jesus. You can have all this world. Give me Jesus. When I come to die, when I come to die, when I come to die, give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. You can have all this world. You can have all this world. You can have all this world. Give me Jesus. Thank you. And I'd like to start out just with a thank you to the church. This is my 4th trip, and the church has always supported me in every way. I was able to take supplies donated from the church. Prayer, there's everybody stands behind me. Prayer, and then financially. Every time the Lord's led me on this trip, the church has been behind me, and I thank you for that. My family, couldn't do it without the family behind me also. Megan has supported me wholeheartedly in this ever since I started, and I couldn't do it. It'd be tough to do without that. And then at the clinic, everybody covers all the gaps, or there may not be that many gaps when I'm gone. It seems to work. It seems to work okay. But most of all, I'd like to thank God for bringing me to this. So some of you know the story, some of you don't. Probably in about 2015, God was kind of dealing with me. At that point, I'd been a Christian for 15 or 16 years, and I mean, basically, it was time to grow up a little bit spiritually and move off the spiritual milk and start growing. And I didn't really know what all that meant, but through reading, I read a book by David Platt called Radical, and toward the end of that, he talked about tithing of your time, and that really struck with me. As Americans, we have time, talent, and treasures, and treasures are probably the easiest for us to turn loose of, and time, I would say, is the hardest. And being blessed with a career as a rural food animal veterinarian, it lends itself well to serve in third world countries as far as agricultural development goes. And so I connected with Christian Veterinary Missions, and they have a list of mission groups that are basically looking for veterinary assistance. When I read through that list back in 2015, 2016, one of the descriptions mentioned bees, aquaponics, and small ruminants or sheep and goats. And basically at that time, if I wasn't at the clinic, I was doing one of those 3 things. And so I knew that was the place that I was being called to, and scrolled across, and it said Liberia, and at that point I couldn't have told you what continent Liberia was on, but I knew that was the place. And so that brought me in contact with Travis and Gina Sheets, who founded Hope in the Harvest Missions, and I believe it was in 2014 they started the organization. They're on the ground in Liberia, and that connection with Travis and Gina has been, like I said, I've been going for 8 years. They're friends now, and they were the first missionaries there on the ground. They were there about 5 years, and it's really a blessing to see how the Lord has grown the mission there. Travis and Gina, when they left, the Lord brought Bill and Holly Sable. Travis and Gina built the grounds there, and Travis is the mind behind this. That's beautiful. This is the Ag Research Center there. This is where I stay when I go. Travis he designed this. He did all the architecture, all the ground landscaping and everything. And when it was all built, I think the Lord saw it was time for it. He brought there, and Bill is an evangelist, and he pours into these people, the staff that are there on the ground, and it doesn't stay on the ground. They move about. They do different programs. One's called Farming God's Way, but he also leads in discipleship with these guys that he's there with every day. So that's basically where I got started at, and I'd hate to go on too much further without kind of giving you a little bit of background for those of you that aren't familiar with Liberia. It's right on the coast of West Africa, and that may not be the picture you're expecting to see of Liberian men, but it gives you a good picture of the history, because back in the early 1800s, the U.S. started sending freed slaves back to West Africa, specifically there to Liberia. And that happened over the course of 20 or 30 years. It ended up sending about 10,000 freed slaves back to Liberia. And when these freed slaves ended up on the ground, on the coast there, you know, they're just as foreign to the native people as I would be. And it brings to light, you know, here in the U.S., a lot of our tension is divided on skin color, and you have all the same issues there as far as prejudice and discrimination, and it's not skin color. It brings to light the fact that it's a condition of the heart. It's not about skin color in particular. These guys were just as foreign there at the time when they landed in the early 1800s as like I said, I would have been. But they started developing the government, and they based everything on the U.S. The U.S. and Liberian histories tie really closely together in the structure of their government, their constitution, their presidential mansion. It looks like the White House. And actually, when these guys, as they developed the government and they became independent, I believe it was 1847, they opened the ports, and there were a lot of goods in West Africa, and these guys became wealthy. So these are freed slaves that come from the U.S., and the term for them there, even to today, is Americo-Liberians, the people that descend from these American immigrants. Because they became wealthy, they emulated what they left in the United States. They started dressing like the wealthy plantation owners. You'd even see in some of the pictures the big top hats that built plantation houses, and unfortunately even started enslaving some of the native people there. So it's once again, just to reiterate, it illustrates a condition of the heart that we get so hung up on skin color. It's deeper than that. It's more than that. But they ruled, the Americo-Liberians, they started the government in 1847, and until 1980, they ruled the government. It was only these Americo-Liberians that controlled the government, discriminated against there are 16 native tribes in Liberia. There was a lot of discrimination against these tribes, amongst the tribes. There's quarreling. In 1980, what they called the Rice Wars started. So William Tolbert was the president at that time. He implemented a tax on rice. The native people rose up, and a coup occurred, led by Samuel Doe, and William Tolbert was killed in the presidential mansion, holding one of his children. He was stabbed to death there, and that started basically in 1980, 20-year civil war. It was a couple different civil wars broke up, and it was 20 bloody years. They estimate 250,000 people died during that civil war. And this is a country that's about the size of Oklahoma. I think there's 5 million people, somewhere between 4 and 5 million people. So it was a bloody civil war. I could talk about Liberian history all day, but I'm not going to tarry on that too long. We'll move into my trip now that you have a little bit of background. All of my African trips start out the same way. There's usually some type of vehicle malfunction or problem. We got to the airport and heading back. We drive all the way across the country from where we land right on the coast, and then we go inland pretty much all the way across the country. And, yeah, we had a blowout about a couple hours, maybe an hour and a half into the trip. And this is a big van. It had duals on the rear, and Mark, I'll talk more about him as we go. He's our driver, and But he's as cool as a cucumber. That tire blew, and van goes to kind of swaying back and forth. It's a big, tall van, and he just, you know, kept going. About a quarter mile down the road, he eased up, and we had Thomas and Emmanuel with us, and they jumped out like a NASCAR pit crew. And, along with Mark, they had us back up and rolling within 20 or 30 minutes. So I can tell you, I've been there 4 times. I think each of the trips has started with some type of malfunction. We finally ended up in country at the Ark. Now my first week there, I did a lot of farm visits because my main purpose and my focus in going, and I'll explain that later. This was my focus in going, was rabies vaccination clinics. I carried about 1,000 doses of rabies vaccine with me, and on the intent of having a few clinics where we vaccinate dogs as many as we can, because rabies is a huge problem in Liberia. Peter Toze, the guy that helped me, he had went to, because there's no government statistics available, he went to the Methodist hospital there in Ganta. So this is one hospital in one town. And he combed the records. This was part of a research project he did before I got there. But he found 30 human rabies deaths noted in that one hospital in 1 year. In the U.S., we've averaged 2.5 cases a year over the last 20 years. That's compared to the U.S. population now, which is however many million it is, to 4 or 5 million in Liberia. Just to stress the importance or the significance of rabies in the country. But that first week, I spent a lot of time, we were getting the lab, kind of taking stock. It had been 5 years since I'd been there. Kind of taking stock of the lab there and figuring out how we needed to restock it and move forward. And then also we were able to do a lot of farm visits and go see some different places. And I had done this same type of thing back in 8 years ago. And it's really encouraging to see the advancement across the board in these farm visits over the 8-year period. And almost every one of them had had some type of contact with the Ag Research Center there. It's knowledge that's trickling out from the Ark into the community where it helps these people. One of the things they have to do is mix their own feed for their livestock. And a lot of that knowledge and a lot of the components that it goes and the availability of those components there as that's been put together through the Ag Research Center. So that's encouraging to see that. The first place we went, this is Joseph Blasson. He has a farm, and I'll show you some pictures of his farm. But this video right here, I have it on here for 2 reasons. One, I want you to hear some Liberian English. It is English, but it's you know, it's a different slang than ours. But what Joseph is doing right here is telling us about waking his boys up. And his sons are out of frame here, but they're about my age. And they work here on the farm with him. And he's telling us how he would get them up in the morning to get out. And he said he had fled to the Ivory Coast, and he was able to leave that refugee camp in 2003. And he told us that, he told his wife, he said, if the Lord will let us, he said, we're never going to depend on another person for our food again. And he's lived by that. They have a huge farm, and he's brought his boys up in this. They raise pigs, they have palm, rice, several different vegetables. But he's showing us, he's fixing to show you how he woke his boys up every morning with his song.
Okay.
The song goes, wake up, be happy, pray to God, do something. Don't let the day go free. Don't let the day go free, my child. Don't let the day go free, my son. Wake up, gentlemen.
Now I was there when they filmed that, you know, and it didn't really dawn on me till I listened to it several times, but I think that video explains a lot about where Liberia is at today, because there are not many Joseph Blassons left. When you have a 20-year civil war, you don't see many older Liberian men. And when you take a whole generation my age that didn't have somebody tell them, wake up, let's go do something, that's what happens, is what Liberia had drifted into a nation that imported 80% of their food when they're on fertile ground and have the ability to produce a lot. Here's another video. He's showing how he processes palm. So they put the palm kernels in this. It's a press. So it's hard to understand. But what he's explaining is they put the palm kernel in this press. It presses the palm down, and they're able to harvest palm oil, which palm oil is the major cooking oil in Liberia. It does take the American digestive tract there too to adjust to that. It's really good. But they sell that oil, and the byproduct is like what we use byproducts for our feeds here, you know, DDG or soybean hulls or cottonseed hulls. That's what they get there. They get a byproduct that they're able to mix in their pig feed, produce major components of their own feeds that they're feeding their livestock, so they don't have to try to spend a lot of money to feed their animals. This is some wheat that they had harvested, or I'm sorry, rice. Some rice that they had harvested there in the lowlands, and they have some vegetables planted. Somebody actually asked if they use the rice to feed the livestock, and that's not a question to ask a Liberian, because they eat rice every day, at least twice a day, and so the rice is not for the livestock. That's for people to eat. So here's one of his pigs, and like I was saying, when I went 8 years ago and doing these same farm tours, I saw emaciated pigs that were, you know, just vocal because they were so hungry. And now I go to several different farms and I see pigs that are well fed, and you got a sow here with 12 or 13 piglets, and it's encouraging to see that advancement in the country. You know, how much of it's directly related to the ARC. I'd like to think at least part of it is. This is my 4th trip there. It's the first time I was able to really be exposed to any cattle. The cattle there, the Fulani people, which live in Mali, they're nomads, and they bring the cattle into Liberia, and they're butchered there in the markets. Of course, there's no refrigeration, so it's a kind of a scheduled process when that happens. They're sold by the pound in the market 2 days a week. But this Fulani family, they stay here. They're kind of a home base as the nomads come through. And Bill Sabo has been working on this relationship for, I know the last time I was there, he asked me if I would like to go out to the Fulani. And at that time, he didn't really have the relationship there. But now he's worked continually building the relationship with these Fulani people. We were able to be invited out and go check out their cattle and visit these, this is a Muslim people group. I don't know if I mentioned them. That's part of why it's taken a while to build that relationship. And if you hear missionaries talk about building relationships with Muslim people groups, it takes a long time to develop that trust. And Bill's working at that, I can tell you that. And check out their cattle, and part of the way Bill's done that is he actually owns 4 of these cows, and that's Bill's brand there that these Fulani folks are taking care of. I looked up this morning because, like I said, they walk these cattle from Mali to Liberia, and just for equivalent, you know, if you wanted to get out about 20 head of your cattle and start walking to Albuquerque, New Mexico, that would be about the same trip. So that was really a great chance to visit these folks and hopefully start a relationship there with them. It's encouraging because, you know, as at the end of the conversation, he told me, this Fulani man told me he had one problem he asked me to look at, which, you know, cattle are kind of what I do. So I thought, man, this could be good. Maybe I can help this guy out. And they had butchered the cow there a couple days earlier, and a common problem, evidently. This cow had gotten sick, and of course they're going to go ahead and butcher one when they get sick. And the rumen contents were there was full of plastic, and that's not the first time I've had people come to me with this problem is plastics are everywhere in Liberia, like they are across the world, but the difference is in Liberia there's no waste management infrastructure, there's nothing. Plastics everywhere. And the livestock eat this stuff like crazy, and it gets bound up in a lot of the ruminants, and that's one of the problems they're struggling with. There's a theme of several problems that come up that are hard to deal with, and that's one of them. And we're trying to help them out every way we can, but that's a common problem. We also went to another farm visit that was a layer facility, and they had 5,000 layers. I've never seen a chicken establishment this large in Liberia, but there's 5,000 layers there at this. They also mix their own feed. I mean, we take a lot of things for granted here, but the ability to go or order a load of feed or go to the feed store, that's just not something that's, if they were to buy a mixed feed, they would have to go to Guinea, the next country over. It's not available in Liberia. So it's for them to be successful and make a profit, it's crucial that they are able to make their own feed. And this guy had figured out how to make his own chicken feed, and actually he pelletized the feed there also. These were some of the chicks. This is at the Ag Research Center there. And so then that leads to the next visit we had out. When I decided that this trip was going to be available to me, I started reading last fall about studying up on rabies in Liberia, and I came across an article that talked about a rabies quarantine facility and a rabies testing site, and they listed one in Monrovia and one in Gante, which is the town we go to. And I asked Gina, who's very familiar with the area, and she said, I've never heard of that. You know, there's some question if it really even existed. So she asked Mark and kind of put him in charge of it, and Mark has a lot of contacts. And he was able to get us, we went to the quarantine facility. This is at the Liberia-Guinea border, which I feel pretty honored to be able to get inside that facility. So this is if you're bringing animals from Guinea into Liberia, it would have to come through this area. There's actually very little testing equipment. I mean, most any veterinary hospital in the U.S. would have more diagnostic equipment than this international border here does, but they do collect some samples and send them in country, and so we made some contacts with some folks there that hopefully as time goes along and we keep developing and working with this rabies vaccination program, we can develop these relationships and people that are in tune with the government there in Liberia. So this is inside the facility there, and I'll just point out Mark on the right there. That's our driver. When you're in a place like Liberia, it's good to have a guy like Mark. That he not I mean he's an imposing figure, but he is always on top of where we're going, who's around, where everybody's at. You know, I can't overstate how important he is to the success of that mission there, and I'm always glad when Mark's around. And so that's the loadout facility. So if you come into Liberia from Guinea, you would load your livestock back up right here, and they go through a small footpath right there. Actually, I was able to meet Amelia, who is responsible for the rabies specimen collection there at the facility. So if there was a rabid dog that needed to be tested, she would collect the head and send that to Monrovia. And she said that she had never been rabies vaccinated herself, which that's just not something that you would find in the U.S. where there's somebody that's actually handling potential suspects that have not been vaccinated. So we actually bought human vaccine for her to take, and to my knowledge, she still hadn't come, and she needed to come and have that given there at the ARC, and I don't believe she's done that yet. But we did vaccinate all of our staff that hadn't been vaccinated, that was helping us with the vaccination clinic. One of the last little tours we took, we always go to the meat market. So that's some fish, and if this was a scratch and sniff, photo here, you get a pretty loud aroma. That's some fish available there, and chicken feet. Everything's open air market, and you know, during COVID, you heard a lot about bush meat and in China, how all that got started. This is bush meat. This is some dried monkey there in the meat market. Yeah, and apparently it's great. I haven't tried. We also went to a cocoa plantation. This is called the Cocoa Pod. And so we're able to see, we can walk the cocoa process all the way through from the cocoa plant to, there's actually a chocolate making facility there that one of the graduates of LICC, the Liberian International Christian College, he actually makes chocolate bars there on the side. So that was another interesting tour we did. And then also, as all this is going on, you guys had donated to the eyeglass clinic with glasses and the pouches to put the glasses in. I had very little to do with this because I was usually, these people had trained to do this, I had not. I was just the Walmart door greeter or wherever they needed me to be when they were doing these clinics. But they handed out several hundred pair of eyeglasses, and these were all reading glasses to people that could need them. And almost all these people were carrying the Bible, and you know, when they started, they would have difficulty reading, and by the time it was over with, you know, you could see the expression on their face when they put these glasses on, and you know, they can read. So that's a really important project that they do there. So that brings me, that gets us through the first week. Saturday, Bill Sable, one of his big things, I didn't do this on the first couple trips, but he will pair up the American visitors there with one of the Liberian staff, and you can go out to their home, and it's really a great program, because you go out and you see how these people are living, where they're living, and it's not there on our little place. You get out into the town, and it's a whole different experience. And I was paired up with Emmanuel this time and got to go to his place. So when you do this, you either hop on a motorcycle taxi, or Emmanuel owns his own bike. So I would jump on with him, and we went to his place. Like I said, this was Saturday evening. Emmanuel's a great young guy, a good, solid Christian kid. He's worked really hard. He lives with his family there, and they built this piggery there in their community, and they have 40 pigs inside this structure. And this leads to one of the other really hard problems that's commonly asked. You know, that these pigs they live right here, their whole life they live right here. And the reason being, if you look in the corner back there, you see the hole in the wall that he's got covered up with the screen. A month or so before I was there, some of the neighbors had busted a hole in the wall. He had a sow that was 3 days from farrowing, and they killed that. He heard them when they killed that sow, and went out there. Of course, they took off, and then he's just left with a dead pig that he's invested time and money. That's the struggle that these young people deal with all the time. That's one of the hard problems that I think only God, as time goes along, can lift some of the darkness that they face there. But that's why these pigs live completely confined. But here again, he's taking knowledge from the ark on how to mix his feed and feed these pigs. And I mean, they're, compared to the pigs I've seen there previously, these pigs are in really good shape. I took the picture of this. It's a palm tree that he had there. You can actually see the palm fruit really good. This is there in his backyard. But those little nuts right there, that's what they collect and get the palm oil. The palm cake comes from that. And he's got a whole nursery there where he's bought a bunch of hybrid palm plants to help establish planting his own palm orchard. You know, he's thinking, you know, he's really trying. He's going to plant his palm orchard. Like I said, it's a hybrid variety of palm. It's supposed to produce even more than the native palm there. So this was Saturday evening, and the plan was, after this was over with, Peter Toze was waiting back at the Ag Research Center for me, because we had gotten airtime on the radio station there. This was the Voice of Nimba. It goes over the whole side of the country. But because there'd not been a whole lot of publicity about the vaccination clinics coming up. Peter hadn't been there prior to getting there, and the word hadn't gotten out. So they're able to get radio time. We actually had enough time to talk about the clinics, and actually talk about rabies and how it's transmitted, and I was hoping that would be a really good way to get the word out and increase the number of folks there at the clinics. So that was supposed to happen just as I was finishing up a manual here, and as we were finishing up, his phone rang, and I thought, well, they're waiting for him back at the ARC, and he hangs up the phone, and he said there's been an accident, and I didn't even try to figure it out at that point. We just jumped back on his motorcycle, and so he goes down the road a little bit, and he turned around to me, he says, we're going to take a shortcut. And there's a palm tree, he looked like kind of laying down, and he drove through the branches of this palm tree, and we ended up driving through some people's back of their yards, and through a market, and we ended up back out on the main highway, and Thomas was waiting for us there, and long story short, they got us to the hospital there, and Mark was waiting outside, and when I got there, I asked Mark what had happened, and Dan, another one of the Americans that was there with us, he had been in an accident on one of these motorbikes, and what had happened is two of these bikes were crossing, meeting each other close enough together that a sharp piece on one of the bikes caught Dan's leg as they were passing, and it cut right above his knee up to the mid-thigh. The cut was a little over a foot long, and it was about 3/4 of an inch deep down right over the top of his knee. Now I didn't know that when I got there because Mark ushers me in, and I didn't realize, it takes a while to put the whole story together, but they were trying to get me back there because the doctors wouldn't take a look at Dan, and it all boils down to there was one young doctor there, maybe 20, in his young lower 20s, but he was intimidated, I think, to work on an American, and nothing was happening. Dan was laying there in the bed. When I got in there, his legs all wrapped up, and Kelly, that was with him, standing there with no shirt on, so I'm trying to figure out what the heck was going on at their home visit. But Kelly's shirt was on Dan's leg, and so they're all looking to me, because nothing's happening, and of course, Dan's understandably distraught. We don't know at that point if he's going to be evacuated out of there. But, I was certainly praying for some wisdom and God's guidance, and it just dawned on me, I asked Dan, I said, did you walk in here? And he said, well, yeah. He said, they helped me a little bit, but my biggest worry when I walked in there was that the bone, the bone was going to be sticking out of his leg, and that would have been a whole another story, but luckily when I figured out that he walked in there, we took his bandage off and saw a really nasty cut. Still none of the staff's helping. He's in this big room with sheets. It's a hospital bed, but it just has a regular fitted sheet on it. And hopefully it was clean when he started. It wasn't clean when I got there, but there's just sheets hung up. There's probably 6 or 8 different people in this room. Nothing's happening. And so I take his bandage off, and they went back. I actually had a first aid kit with me. I've not used it in the other 3 times I've been there, but I was glad I had it this time. I had enough to kind of clean his wound up a little bit. And we bandaged it. I was actually starting to draw some flies about this point, and bandaged it, cleaned it up, and then they called me out and they asked me if I'd be willing to. They talked. Josephus Peters is the doctor's name. I didn't realize how much confrontation had been going on because I've been focused on that, but evidently Mark had tried to strong-arm him into fixing Dan. And then Dr. Kiamu, the president of the college, showed up, and he's a great guy, very well-traveled, very highly educated librarian man, and he was able to calmly talk to this doctor, and he, along with Peter Toze, they talked the doctor into going ahead and doing the procedure and allowing me to go into the operating room. Everybody was a little concerned about exactly, what kind of care he would get there. So I left Dan, and they escorted me to to the OR, and this is a library and OR. This is probably the best thing to have. I mean, I think they were trying to show their best to us, and you know, anybody in the medical field knows it. They did have an anesthesia machine that looked like it was probably from 1960 or so back there in the back. So when they finally rolled Dan in, Dan says, "Am I going to be awake for this?" And before the doctors could say anything, I said yes. And they agreed just to give him a local sedation, because I did not want to see him sedated under general anesthesia there. Long story short, they ended up, Josephus and Othello did a really nice job of sewing Dan up. Dan said it was like living through a Saw movie. That's how he recounted it. But it was tough, but he got it done. And before it was over with, the doctor was, when he first approached me, he was not happy about doing it. He was not happy about having me there, you know, looking over his shoulder. He said it wasn't procedure, you know, that I was there in my street clothes, which he's wearing rubber boots and a rubber apron. But I said, I'll wear whatever, you know, whatever you need to put on, I'll put it on. And I said, if you got some shoe covers, I'll put them on. Well, they couldn't find 2 shoe covers. They finally found 2 shoe covers in the whole hospital. And I put those on, and that's how it started out pretty contentious between Josephus and I, but by the time it was over with, we hugged it out and exchanged Christmas card info. It might not get quite that dramatic, but it did smooth out as time went along. But, so all that's going on, and I missed the radio interview. That didn't happen, because something more important was going on with getting Dan taken care of there. And that was on Saturday. Monday is when the rabies vaccination clinic was due to start. And I put this picture in there because it's pretty great. This dad showed up. There weren't a lot of people that showed up the first day. Like I said, we didn't have it publicized very well, and I think we did 26 dogs. This guy understood, and the problem is not everybody understands, but he understood the reason he was there with his family was those kids are playing with those dogs all the time. And across the world, 90% of human rabies deaths are in children under the age of 15, because they're the ones that are playing with dogs. And near 90% of rabies transmissions across the world are from pet dogs. It's the most common way children are exposed to rabies worldwide. This guy understood that. He had their whole crew of dogs there getting them vaccinated. Even some of the dogs come painted up. They want to look a little more intimidating. Dogs, I mean, the librarians will tell you they're for protection. You know, they're for hunting, and they're for food. The librarians do eat some dog. I mean, there's no other way to sugarcoat that, but that does happen. Of course, we always draw a crowd when we're there doing the rabies clinics. Lacey had got kicked out of school that day because she didn't have her pencil and paper, so she came and hang out with us while we were doing the clinic. And then the second day, we went out in a village. We were doing another clinic, and that day we drew about 85, 86 dogs. Now, mind you, last time I did this, we would have 300 or 400 a day. But it was near a school, and so there were some school kids that were checking us out. Like I said, we always draw a crowd, a bunch of white guys in the neighborhood vaccinating dogs. But you know, I was feeling a bit sorry for myself. I went there, I carried a lot of rabies vaccine, and not much had seemed to happen at the time as far as the vaccination clinic goes. This guy's Peter Toze, and I mean, if you've been to one of these before, I met Peter on the first trip. He was a night guard there, and I quickly figured out that Peter's got above average knowledge, especially when it comes to the medical field. He made it through the war. He went to the Ivory Coast also, but he served mission groups through most of his life, and always on the health field. He knows more about in the human medical field than I do. But we just got connected there on that first trip because he was, like I said, he got hired as a night guard because he had heard about what was going on at the Ark there, and he wanted to get his foot in the door. And after that, he ended up being the head technician. He was over the whole lab. that we've set up there, and 2020 hit Liberia just like it did the U.S. Peter got sick, his mom got sick, his 90-year-old mother that I was able to meet last trip. But she passed away, and Peter, during that time of his illness and her passing away and the lab being understocked, he decided to leave the Ark, and he wanted to do his own, try to do his own ag venture. And he ended up, before he left to go do that, he went and got another degree at Cuttington, another university, which basically brings him up to the level of a paraveterinarian there in Liberia. He can sell veterinary medical products, and so that's where Peter was at before I got there. He had left the Ark. When he heard that we were coming back to visit, he came to visit me, and long story short, he was offered a job on day one when he came back there, because we saw the need to have Peter Tose back at the Ark, and how important he is to what goes on there day to day. But anyway, like I said, I'm feeling a little bit sorry for myself. I didn't get on the rabies vaccines, given that I'd like to. Now, those are all still there, and we trained a whole staff of guys that are going to start on a more routine basis doing rabies vaccination clinics there on the ground. But the last day that I was there, they had a staff meeting, because several of the people that were traveling with us were board members of Hope in the Harvest. So they had this big board meeting of the board members and all the staff that worked there, the librarian staff. They had this meeting. I try not to even go to staff meetings at Foswell Animal Care, so I was not there. I was going to take some pictures around and about while everybody was busy doing that. I get back there to the back, and all the pigs are out. All the pigs were loose. I thought maybe I could put them in, and I quickly saw that was a bad idea. So I had to go get the guys that had to interrupt this meeting, and they asked me just to stay there in the meeting. So then I'm stuck in the meeting after these guys went and got the pigs put up. But Peter, what happened, the grounds there had been basically turned over to totally librarian leadership and control for the last couple of years. And when we got there, the board saw that it really wasn't up to the standard that it had been prior. And so a lot of this meeting was on, kind of having that discussion with these staff members. And it's like any of those situations, there's some of those guys are offering excuses, or, we'll do better. And Peter had just come back. Like I said, when we came back, they offered him the job to come back. And he stood up, and, he's not a guy that says a whole lot, but when he does, everybody just got quiet. You could have heard a pin drop. And he told us about his plans to go back, and, he said, as he would say, he said, I'm an old man. And he said that he'd planned to go back and buy his own livestock, and buy a piece of land, and live out his day doing that. But Conan called him and told him that we were coming to visit, and, then he was confused about what the Lord was leading him to do, because he wanted to go basically live out, buy a place out in the bush and live his life out. And he said the middle of one night, he woke up, and God had brought this to his attention. Proverbs 19:21, he stood up and he just starts reading this verse, and it says, many are the plans of a person's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. In that moment, me feeling sorry for myself, as far as not getting all the rabies vaccines done, I wanted. The other part of Dan's story that I didn't share is, after he was hurt, we did daily bandage changes on him and everything, and he was fine as far as the laceration goes. But the next day, the driver of his bike had been put in jail that night. I won't even try to explain all that, but he had been jailed and his bike impounded. That driver was turned out of jail basically to come ask us for money, or ask the mission for money to get his bike out. And the mission did help him get his bike back. But Dan, that was on Sunday morning when that happened, and he sat in the church service with us. And Dan met with this fellow a couple days later. We saw him in town just randomly, and Dan witnessed to that guy and brought him to Christ right there in the middle of Gonta. And a day or two after all of this had happened, Dan had an interpreter for the eyeglass clinic, and he witnessed to that guy who has since been baptized along with his wife. That's 3 souls that were touched by Dan's presence there, and I don't know what the whole bike accident, how much a big role that had to play in it. The point being, in that moment, I realized that God's plan was happening, and my plan was not significant. God's plan was occurring on that trip. Then we had one final adventure before we left out. We went to Mount Nimba, which is the highest point in Liberia. And this is a picture. It's portions of Mount Nimba have been mined. So this is at the bottom of a quarry there. There's those old mining facilities, structures that were built in the early 50s, and it wasn't a wise decision, but 3 of us, all white guys, decided to go take a look at this, and we were led by David, which he's 14. He lives there with the Sables. He's a Sable son. And as he walked over that hill right there and looked off in there, he yelled, "Cobra." And so we all took off running, and we didn't go back till these guys walked in and cleared it. The Cobra was left. They said the Cobra won't be there when you go back, and it wasn't. But anyway, we went and took a look inside the mine. But once again, I can't. They have some wonderful staff there. These Liberian guys that invest and make it. They work at the art, but they also take care of when people are there, making sure it's an enjoyable and safe time there. With that, I just want to say thank you again. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sending me. It was a great trip. That's really all I got.